Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we explore the inner game of writing and inspire you to start, finish, and publish your book. I'm Mark Desvaux, and this week I'm treating you to the best of the Bestseller Experiment. I've delved through and handpicked my favourite shows of the 500 plus that we've done of best-selling authors who have collectively sold over 1 billion books. Who's it going to be this week? Let's run the show.
Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a best-selling novel and inspire you to finish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I am Mark Desvaux. Mark, tell us about this incredible interview that you've done this week.
It was a real privilege to talk to Taylor Jenkins-Reid. She's an author of a number of novels, including The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, One True Loves, Maybe in Another Life. Her books have been, they just books that turn up in Book of the Month groups, or like they get featured in magazines everywhere. But her new book, Daisy Jones and the Six, is, I think, a real breakthrough. It's as you'll see on the cover, it's been picked up by Reese Witherspoon for a TV show. She's executive producing that, and it's just one of these books everyone who reads it falls in love with it completely. And it's a story about music and rock and roll, Mr. D. How about that?
I know.
It'll never work, will it?
It'll never work. Those just doesn't sell.
And that's again, we'll talk about this afterwards, but one of the problems I think with books about rock and roll is the truth is always much stranger than fiction. But the really clever thing that Taylor has done here, rather than write a straightforward narrative, she's written it as in a kind of non-fiction format, where it's like a very long Rolling Stone interview, oral history, essentially. So you have the names, so it'll say Billy, and then there'll be what Billy says, and it will jump. I mean, if you go on Amazon and just look at a sample page, you'll see exactly what we mean. And it's a genius way of doing it, because you start believing this band is real, which is one of the problems you always have to overcome with this kind of fiction. But yeah, we talk about that more in the interview. But I was delighted to speak to Taylor. She was touring the UK at the time, going from pillar to post, and this is it's an incredible story how this all came about.
Brilliant. So let's listen to Mark interviewing Taylor Jenkins-Reid.
Taylor Jenkins-Reid, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
You're on tour in the UK. You've been all over the place, haven't you?
I have, yeah. I was in Dublin and Bath, and now I'm in London, and I'll be in Brighton tonight. Yeah.
Do you even know what time of day it is?
I don't know what time of day. I don't know where I am. I just go where people tell me to go.
Congratulations on Daisy Jones and the Six. It's an extraordinary novel. And the thing that jumped out at me immediately was the format of the book. This wasn't your regular novel. It, on the face of it, it's like a classic kind of Rolling Stone interview format with, the name tags and dialogue, and that's it. And in doing that, you're kind of robbing yourself of a lot of the usual things that authors use. What was the big challenge with that?
I've said it is sort of like writing a book with one hand tied behind your back, because you don't have any direct relationship with the reader. And so, there's no narrator. The entire story is told through this chorus of voices. And it's typically a nonfiction format. So, I think people are used to reading oral histories when they're reading about real bands or a real television show or a real cultural moment. But to use it for fiction, it presented a lot of challenges, and then it presented a lot of opportunities. And in terms of challenge, it was very difficult to figure out how I get very specific details into the reader's mind so that they can picture what's going on, while always making sure that those details were given to you by a specific character for a specific reason in a way that felt believable.
You say it's a format used by real bands, talking about real bands, but that, I think, works to your advantage, because you're reading this, you're thinking, I can't believe this isn't a real band.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to do it this way. This is the second book that I've written about a famous person. And, my book before this is called The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and Evelyn Hugo's a movie star who's going on the record about her life. And so it sort of reads like a fake memoir. And it's important, I think, when you're trying to write about a fake cultural moment, that in order for it to not seem cheesy, you really have to put the idea in the reader's head that this could be real. And writing the book as an oral history did a lot of the heavy lifting for me, because I'm presenting it to the reader as if it is real. The conceit is very, I guess, straight-faced, you know? And so I think it does a lot of the work of inhabiting the reader's mind and saying, oh, like, you know, let me enter this world in which this band was a real band.
Now, we've spoken about unreliable narrators on the podcast before. Here, you've got an entire band of them. Well, I love you. You have one line where they say, oh, and they went away for someone's birthday, and then you discover it was actually the wedding anniversary. And or just no one remembers how the name of the band came about. All of these things ring completely true. How do you keep track of who's telling the truth, though?
You know, it's interesting. I don't actually keep track of who's telling the truth. I think that's what's so interesting about something like this. When I came up with the idea to write an oral history, I wasn't thinking this will present a great opportunity to talk about truth and point of view and memory and all those things. But when I started writing, I realized that you can't write this story without touching on the fact that people remember things differently. People remember things typically in a very self-serving way. And everything that all of the characters are telling the reader are filtered through their personality, their motivations, their biases. And so that became a very, very important piece of it by necessity. So yeah, there are areas of the story where people don't agree, or one person will give a detail that seems really specific, it must be true, and then another person will give a detail that's equally specific and completely contradictory. And you know, I think there is a way for me to write this book and say, well, I know the exact truth, and then I'm going to use each character in a certain way to you know, stand on either side of that truth. I didn't do that. I felt like the truth is somewhere in here. Where it is up to each individual person, you know, including me. And so there are certain moments where I may think, well, when Karen and Warren don't agree, I'm siding, you know, more with Karen, or you know. But I think people will read it and feel that way. That there may be a character that you relate to more or makes more sense to you, and so when they give an account of something, you think that's probably the closest one to the truth. That's what I'm going to go with.
Point of view is very important when you're writing. You know, you can have close third person or actual first person. This, you're switching point of view pretty much every other paragraph. So again, what were the challenges there?
You know, I just had to make sure that I knew each character really well. I had to make sure that I knew not just how they felt in the 70s, but how they feel now about what happened in the 70s, which are two different things, and how they're explaining away their behavior to themselves, which we always do when we're looking back. And so it was just really important to make sure that I knew who each person was, and I knew how they felt about each other, even if it's not on the page. At one point, I think I even had like a diagram of the whole band, and I was like, well, how does Warren feel about Eddie? How does Eddie feel about Daisy? How does Daisy feel about, you know, and so that, you know, you have arrows pointing from everyone to everyone at some point, because you should be asking yourself, even if it's not on the page, when these 7 people, because it's Daisy Jones and the 6, you know, when these 7 people are in a room, how do they feel about each other, and how does that change? So it was a lot of asking myself those questions before I started writing and as I was writing, to make sure that each character felt distinct.
That's so important. And again, something we've talked about before, a character does not exist in isolation. It's only when you rub them up against someone else and see how they react. Of course, the only person who stays herself all the way through is Daisy. She really doesn't give a crap what people think of her.
Yeah, that is true. Her arc is very much based on her own motivations as opposed to in reaction to things. And actually, I would say Karen, to some extent, that's true too. It's funny. I think the women in this story know themselves better than the men in the story.
Well, that was a great, and that's the thing that I think sets this apart from a lot of rock books and rock biographies. Is it's usually, especially if there's you guys in a band, you hear from the guys, and you never hear from the girlfriends, you never hear from the ex-wives, you never hear from the groupies, but they all get a voice in this one. That must have been a fun opportunity.
Yeah, it was absolutely fun. It was also, to me, the only way that I could write this story. I think a lot of times we dismiss certain roles in these tropes that we tell, right? Like, we know the story of a rock band. We've told it over and over and over, and we always tell it from the same point of view, and we always tell the same story, more or less. It's like, this genius man, and he, gets fame, and he gets isolated and does a lot of drugs, and suddenly he thinks he's a genius, and he doesn't listen to anyone else, and then he crashes and starts to realize what he's lost, and and he makes amends. And I just wasn't interested in doing that. I'm much more interested in what it's like to be his wife, and what it's like to see him really try to fix his life. So Camila, Billy's wife, is a big part of this story, and the book has a lot of respect for her, which I think is not always the case when we tell these stories. Daisy Jones starts out as a groupie, but insists upon being taken seriously as an artist. And again, I don't think we see that as often, but I'm very interested in telling women's stories, and stories of women that will continue to push to be accepted on their own terms, or to have exactly the life that they want. Daisy, Karen, the keyboardist, Camila, Billy's wife, and Simone, Daisy's best friend, who's a disco singer, are all very focused on what they want to get out of the world.
Obviously, there are echoes of bands like Fleetwood Mac, a lot of the Eagles, those kind of California West Coast bands. Is there a danger? I mean, I love hearing rock and roll stories, and of course real life is always stranger than fiction. What's extraordinary about this is you've made a fiction that's probably more extraordinary than real life. But did that give you pause? Did you think, I mean, you've done it with Hollywood already, but did you think, I'm kind of up against real life here? That's a big challenge, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said before, Fleetwood Mac was a huge inspiration for this story, and a big reason why I said it in the 70s. But I knew from the beginning that I couldn't write a woman that was supposed to be Stevie Nicks, because there can be no Stevie Nicks but Stevie Nicks. And anytime you're going to try to emulate her, you're going to fall short, right? When you talk about truth is stranger than fiction, like it's the glamour of Stevie cannot be contained in a book. So I would have failed if that's what I was trying to do. So I set out very purposefully to say, these are the stories that we know the most about this time. These are the women and these are the men that we think of when we think about this time. So I want to come up with a man and a woman who can lead this band, who can live amongst them, but are not them, because otherwise I'm just going to fail. So it's like, Billy Dunn cannot be Mick Jagger. There's only one Jagger. And so Billy's a completely different person. If anything, I might have stolen a little bit from Springsteen for Billy. That I think is the one place where I just couldn't help myself, because my love of Bruce Springsteen is so deep. But yeah. And the other thing too is you have to be mindful of telling a story that's true versus telling a story that feels like it's true. And the most important thing, I think, is to tell a story, and when you're writing fiction, that feels true. So when you look at the things that like Led Zeppelin was doing in the 70s, it's like, I'm not going to write a book about that. No one would believe it. No one would believe it. It's like, and a lot of the stuff gets, you read about like Keith Richards in the 70s, and it's like, that's not I don't want to go there. It's too much. So it was finding that balance of, how do I write a band, and led by these two people that essentially become icons, that can hold their own and tell a story that is both larger than life and honest. And so that took some fine-tuning, for sure. Yeah.
What I really enjoy in this book is you've got this creative tug of war between Daisy and Billy. You've got two people who are used to getting their own way, two captains, if you like, having to compromise and work together. And that insight to the creative process is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to ask you a question here, because I know you've written for TV, and of course writing in TV and film is very collaborative, but one of the joys of writing a novel is it's just you writing the novel. The editor comes in eventually. So could you, having got used to being a novelist and having it all your own way, could you co-write a novel with someone?
No, absolutely not. No. It's funny. I think part of the reason why I like to write novels more than I like to write film and TV is that reason. It's one vision, and I like that. I have worked collaboratively in TV and film, and I am not my best self. I do. There are moments where I hear myself thinking, like, whatever this person's saying is not as good as the idea that I just had, and then I hear it and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe it is. Maybe it is. I get very tunnel vision, and I see something very clearly, and I know exactly how I want to do it. And it's very hard for me to break out of that. And I've learned to do it to the betterment of any project that I've worked on, because I'm, tunnel vision and feeling like, you can see it clearly are great in certain aspects. But when it comes to film and television, you have to listen to other people, and you have to understand that your way is not always the best way, or even often the best way. My husband and I work together a lot. We adapt things, and he's a screenwriter. And he's been very patient with me as I start to understand that passion and a strong point of view are very good things, right? But as the book attests to, one person believing that they know the best way and not being able to listen to other people will eventually lead to failure. You have to grow, and you have to hear other people and be exposed to new ideas. So it's like a thing that it doesn't come natural to me. I have to go above my impulses and learn. And so, TV and film is really fun. I think it is a bit more fun than writing a book, but I feel more comfortable in the space of writing a book because taking notes and listening to other people's ideas is much more passive. I write it, someone else reads it, they give me ideas, and I sit there and I go, this one yes, this one yes, this one maybe not. It's a bit more easier for me.
Pick and choose.
Yeah. When it's all in a group setting and everyone's throwing things, I can't recognize it as well. I'm too set in my own ways. Yeah.
I've done both, and I totally understand. I mean, would it be too much to say that with Billy and Daisy, you're exploring a kind of ego-id thing going on there? Is that yourself?
Oh, for sure. I mean, a little bit. Like, there are definitely parts of Billy that are written where he's saying things that I try not to think, if that makes sense. It's like my worst self is there are definitely moments of the things that Billy's saying, or maybe the way that Billy's behaving that he doesn't see that he's doing. That those are things I try to rise above, but Billy doesn't. Billy thinks that he's totally right to have done them. And Daisy too. Look, like, Daisy is very confident in everything that she does, but she's coming up against the issue of people not taking her seriously and wanting to be heard for what she has to say. And there's a part of me that I can filter through her a little bit there too. They're both writers, they write songs as opposed to novels, but it's that same impulse. And so I definitely think there's the tug of war between Daisy and Billy is not in any direct way the tug of war between my halves, but it's certainly representative of the ways in which the creative process is a lot of contradictory things at once.
Excellent stuff. I want to talk about the world building for a second, because you've written the lyrics to their classic album, Aurora, which, listeners, doesn't exist, but there is a Spotify playlist, and we'll put a link in the show notes that so you can get an idea of what kind of album it is. But you've written all of the lyrics to this, plus lyrics to all of their early, you get snippets of them all the way through. Where did that come in the process? Was that something you built beforehand or as you were writing?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I felt like the lyrics had to be in the book, because if I was reading the book, I would want them. But I did not want to write them. And so, because I'm not a songwriter and I don't see myself that way, and it wasn't something I had any experience in. So I started off thinking, if I'm going to write a book about a fictitious album, then I should know what that album is, and then I can write a book about it. So I sat down and I wrote some songs that were thematically about things that I knew thematically the book would be about. Indulgence and temptation and addiction and things like that. And they were awful. I mean, they were truly awful. I hadn't written any of the book. I mean, they were just really generic. There was nothing that caught you about any of them. And I was like, I'm doomed. This is not going to go well. So I put it to the side and I decided to write the first draft. And so I wrote the first draft, and I'd come upon a moment in which I needed to reference a song. And whatever came to me at that moment, it's like, for instance, Billy writes a song. One of the first songs that you hear about in the stories is this song that Billy writes for his then girlfriend, I guess, Camila, who becomes his wife, called Senora. And he writes it, is what he thinks is like this really romantic song for her. And I wanted... It is a romantic song, but they're not married, so technically Camila would be a senorita. But there's that white man thing of like, I can go so far, but I can't think too far ahead, because he doesn't actually understand Spanish, So I would say, oh, okay, I'm gonna call this Senora, and that's gonna. And then I'd have to reference a lyric, and I'd be like, all right, well, let me just, in this moment, what do I think Billy would say? And I'd write like a little bit, and then I keep going. And by the end I got to the end of the book, and I had, maybe like 5 songs that had been referenced in the book, and then the entire album that's referenced very heavily in the book. And I thought, all right, now I got to go write all these songs. But it was actually much easier once I had written the book, because I realized what I was missing before was specificity. I was missing point of view. I didn't know who Billy was. I didn't know who Daisy was. I didn't know the context, the perfectly, exquisitely specific context that eventually became the writing of Aurora. I didn't have any of that. So now it was like, okay, well, I need a song that Daisy would have written that is a very like plaintive, clear as day to anyone that's looking at it song about this, but that someone else could say, oh no, I actually think it's about this. I had very specific rules that I needed to follow, and these voices that I had been working with for a whole draft to use to do it. So it became much, much easier. I suddenly felt like, oh, I get this, and I know how Daisy would talk, and I know how Billy would talk, and I know the types of metaphors they'd be drawn to, and it became a lot more fun then.
Fantastic. And of course, the great news is this has been, it's in development as a TV series, an 13-part Amazon TV series. Right. Someone's going to have to write those songs.
I know. It's great. So at the back of the book, all of the songs to Aurora are in there, and they will take, the album Aurora and a lot of the other songs that are peppered throughout and create a sound for this band and create the album. And I'm really, really excited about it because I don't know. I've never heard these songs. I don't have music that goes with them necessarily. I hear something in my head, but I'm not a musician. I don't have the tools to be able to translate, what's in my head to the piano or guitar or whatever it is. So I'm really, really excited to see what they do. And I'm also really glad that it's not my problem to figure out how to do that. Yeah.
Is there any dream artist you'd like to come in and record for you?
It's funny. There have been so many artists that have been mentioned that now that people talk about them, I think, oh yeah, we do have a couple of artists who are a flashback to the 70s in some ways. Florence and the Machine or Haim or Harry Styles' new album, which is like very 70s rock. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to get a sound out there that is somehow both of then and now, because I actually think that people are doing that more than I realized when I started writing it.
Absolutely. How involved are you with the TV show?
I'm very informally involved. They are very nice and they keep me informed of what's going on. But I like to say I kind of have all of the fun and none of the responsibility right now, which is nice. I'm on to writing another book, and so I'm happy. My work is done here, and now it's in somebody else's hands.
Stuff. I was talking to one of the authors we've recorded on here before, Joanna Naden, who met you the other day, and she said, I have to ask you about the Jennifer Aniston story.
Oh, yeah. It's fun. I met Jennifer Aniston very, very briefly because I live in Los Angeles and I worked in Hollywood right out of college. I met her. I mean, we're talking like 5 seconds, literally. But I had told all my friends, because I knew she was coming to the office, I told them all that I was going to meet her, and I like really built it up to be something that it wasn't. And so after it happened, they had all said, you have to tell us how it goes. And it literally was like, she's like, hi, I'm Jennifer. And I was like, hi, I'm Taylor. And that was it. And so I thought, I can't call all my friends and tell them this is nothing. So instead I wrote an email and I made it the story of my day. And I just sort of tried to make something out of nothing. And so I sent it to everyone. And really what it was a short story. But it was the first thing that I had ever really written. And a lot of my friends emailed me back and said, this is really good. You should be a writer. And that was the first time that I'd ever, I just never conceived of it before. So I started writing other things that had happened to me and writing these anecdotal stories and, I got pulled over at the airport or this other thing happened. And then I ran out of interesting things that had happened to me. And so I started writing fiction. And so that very small chance encounter with her gave me, sort of by accident, a good reason to write a story.
We hear this again and again. Writers getting the affirmation from someone saying, you can do this, keep doing it. And that's a huge boost, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think, if I could go back, to 22-year-old me and try to instill confidence in that version of myself without needing the external validation, I think that'd be great. But the truth is, I think, writing is a very audacious thing to do sometimes. You have to have the confidence of saying, I have something to say and I think that people might be interested in reading it. And I didn't have that confidence then. And sometimes I think you do need other people to put that idea in your head, to say it's okay to want that. And I needed that. And so once people told me that they thought that I could do it, that seed started to grow in my brain. It was years until I ever said out loud to someone, I want to publish a book. But that was the very beginning of it, was someone saying, you could do this. Because it is bold, to tell a story and to put yourself out there in the hopes that people will be interested. And so getting a little bit of encouragement in doing that is always helpful. So I always think about it now when I see somebody, a friend of mine, show an interest in something, or be good at something. I always think, well, maybe this is my moment to tell that person they could do it. I have a friend who really likes to do makeup, and I was saying to her the other day, I was like, you could be a makeup artist. You would be great. And I don't think anyone had ever said that to her before. And she probably won't do it, but important that she knows, because you never know, like, when you're telling somebody something that like does begin to sprout.
Excellent. You say you went from college straight to Hollywood. Was there a Hollywood dream? Did you want to write movies? Is that where you started out?
Yeah, I didn't know that I wanted to write, but I always wanted to move to Hollywood. I'm from the East Coast of the States, and but I think I was 10 years old and saying, like, I'm going to Hollywood. Like, I knew it was just something that I wanted to do. I wanted to live in Los Angeles. That was the beginning and the end of it. That's what I was going to do. And so I went to film school. I got a job in Hollywood right after. I did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then it was like two things were happening in my brain. On the one hand, I was going, this isn't exactly what I want, but I'm not quite sure how. And on the other hand, this idea that maybe I wanted to be a writer was coming to fruition. And so I think that's why, when they sort of met in the middle, I said, okay, well, I think I'm going to write a book, as opposed to trying to write a movie or a TV spec. I thought, I'm going to write a novel. And I don't know. I look back on it now and I'm like, how did I know? How did I know that that's the direction that I was going in? But I'm glad that I did, because it's served me well.
Yeah, Hollywood has a habit of chewing people up and spitting them out. Speaking as someone who's been nibbled a bit myself.
Yeah. It's something that you have to have a lot of passion for. But I will say, like, it's a hard life to work in Hollywood. And in every version of that answer, it's really fun. It's really glamorous. It's an experience that I will never forget. But I'm happy now that I get to have one foot in it and one foot out of it. I can feel a little bit more sane writing my books. And then when I'm feeling up for it, step into the Hollywood game a little bit. But it can be hard to keep your sanity.
Yeah, definitely. You've written about Hollywood. You've written about the music business. What's next?
So The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is about 60s Hollywood, and then this is about 70s on the Sunset Strip. So I think I'm going to stay in this space for at least one more book, and I'm writing now about 80s Malibu, like surf culture. Yeah. It's I'm just finishing it up. I have maybe a couple more drafts to do, but I'm hoping by this summer it'll be done. And it's one that I've really poured my heart and soul into. So it's like, on the one hand, I don't want to let it go. On the other hand, I'm very happy to imagine a world in which I have that one, sealed up and on its own. Because I've really, this is one that I've sweat for.
Good stuff. Well, I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Really looking forward to it. Taylor, thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Do you know, when I saw the novel, you mentioned it to me, and I walked into a bookshop literally 3 or 4 days later, and boom, there it was. It had prime placement in, and I wasn't looking for it. It was just there as I walked in. And listening to the incredible journey that this book's had, the fact that it's kind of gone so high in the New York Times, I believe that there is an effect which is, it's about how you get your book out there in as many people talking about it and appearing to be everywhere. Because in my world, you told me about it. I went into the bookshop, saw it, and then now in my world, I believe it's absolutely everywhere. But those are the only 2 places that I've heard about it. But now I have this vision of this incredible, and obviously it's been doing really well. But it'd be interesting to explore that a bit later on in this chat, Mark, about how as indie authors, you can kind of try and take that effect. Because nothing can be everywhere, right? It could be one billboard poster and you think, wow. But Mark, it's a fascinating interview. What was the kind of most important thing you drew from that? Because there was so much there.
Well, like she said, it was trying to write a book with one hand tied behind her back by denying herself a lot of the usual tools that we use as writers, which is that prose stuff, which is descriptions, which is getting inside the minds of the characters, that point of view. And of course, she's flicking from point of view, literally from paragraph to paragraph. So it was a book I was a little bit... Because when we interview people, I don't always read the book because, we usually only have a week and I've got so much else going on. And I thought, if I read this and don't like it, I'm really going to... And I picked it up and I devoured it. Absolutely devoured it.
Yeah, you told me. You were banging on about it on Facebook.
It's so easy to read, which is often a very difficult thing to do. But she has this thing of, she has all these... unreliable narrators, which is a great device, and she's got a whole band of them. Funnily enough, after reading this and after seeing, because I'm seeing that we've had the We Will Rock You, the Queen biopic, there's the Elton John one coming soon, which looks amazing. I emailed my scripts agent. I said to him, look, if anyone's doing a Pink Floyd biopic, I know how to do it. It's going to be a cross between Daisy Jones and the Six, Rashomon, and I, Tonya, because all of those use that unreliable narrator thing, And if you ever read an interview of Pink Floyd, none of them agree. Well, any band, none of them agree how anything went down. And what's so clever, it enables the reader to create their own truth. They will start choosing sides, which I think is a brilliant way to engage readers. So she's not spoon feeding. Which is the temptation when you're doing prose, when you're saying, okay, and so-and-so walked into the room and he saw so-and-so and he thought this and he thought that. In some ways, there's the temptation to spoon feed stuff to the reader and get them on side. But with this kind of format, you're reading it like an interview. And if you're reading a history of a band and the band splits up, you do tend to choose sides. I remember, going back to Pink Floyd again, you were either in the Roger Waters camp or the David Gilmour camp, and never the twain would meet. And, that's a great way to hook the reader in because they want to know how things turn out in the end.
And it's instant conflict, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And what better place to have conflict than within the music industry? I mean, it's rife with conflict. A couple of things, though, going back to what you said, Mark, about one hand tied behind her back. It was really interesting when Taylor mentioned that, because I've often been an advocate of trying to restrict the options we have. Because I think, so I want every writer listening to this right now to think about what some of their biggest problems are. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is we have an infinite number of options. At every single sentence in our book, we can take the novel in an infinite number of ways. Last week, we talked a bit about this Enneagram model where we start to define what the personality is of that person. And in a way, that is kind of filtering and restricting the things that they can and can't do based on who they are. Things that would be inconsistent, you'd have to leave out. I want people to start thinking about how they're going to start putting restrictions on themselves. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to give you a really cool example by none other than Peter Gabriel. Peter Gabriel did an album a couple of years ago, which was covers of his favorite artists. And he then went to each one of those artists and asked them if they would cover their favorite track of his. And it was a 2 CD album. Brilliant. But in the liner notes of this album, he actually says, I actually loved this project because I loved the fact that I was put in a room with a song that had a structure, a certain timing to it, a certain length. The lyrics were written, and I then had to recreate it in my own form. But I had all these wonderful things that made me say, right, you can't move outside of these boundaries. So he talked about creating boundaries, and he loved it. And I sometimes think part of the problem we have, especially with the internet, there's an infinite amount of information out there. We need to actually create boundaries around ourselves as authors to say, right, no matter how many options we want to have, let's restrict ourselves. And maybe having that one hand tied behind her back in this book, Taylor actually, part of the reason why it became so good, because she had to focus in and make what she was working on really, really good in that space that she had.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, the worst thing you can say to any writer is, write whatever you want. You know, if you've ever written a review or a piece for a magazine or a blog or whatever, someone says, just write whatever you want. And I'm like, no. Give me word count. Give me a focus. Claire's just done a gardening blog post for someone, and it was great. It was like the 5 things you love about gardening. So Claire had a very clear structure. She had a word count, which she doubled. But that gave her a focus. That gave her a structure. If someone had said to her, just write about whatever you want about gardening, I don't care. What do I do?
Impossible. It really is. And actually, we often bash genre. You think, genre. Is there really such a thing as a genre? And should you write within a genre? But the same rules apply. Is that when you pick a genre, it comes typically with a set of rules. So it just helps us to say, okay, we're just going to strip away all that stuff that we're not allowed to touch. So if you're struggling with your book right now, here's a massive tip, and tell us if this works for you. We really want to hear if this changes your life and your book starts moving again. Actually reduce the options that you have and see what happens. That might be why you're struggling. And if it changes your life, let us know, because we'll give it a name and then we'll attribute it to this podcast. Very new writing methodology.
It's one of those things that as you might be outlining or you may be pantsing, but sooner or later you need to make a decision about what road you're going to go down. And that's where the crippling anxiety comes in, because you start thinking, what if it's the wrong road? What if it's a dead end? And this is where you need to learn to love the rewrites, really, because I mean, you listen to Pixar talk about this, and it's one of the reasons their films are so long in development, because they're constantly exploring these dead ends. And yes, it might not lead anywhere story-wise, but they might come back with a little nugget of something that contributes to the greater story. I've certainly with screenplays, the first 10 pages are always the easiest, because that's where you're excited, you're out the traps, you're setting up your situation. But once you've set it up, you need to start making tough decisions, and that's hard. It is hard.
It is. Can I give you another example in the music world? Because it's so relevant. It's so interesting. If anyone's ever been out to see a band play live, and the guitarist can't hear himself, what the guitarist does is he turns himself up, and then suddenly the bass player can't hear himself, so he turns himself up, and suddenly the drummer in the back says, I can't, and he starts bashing that, and everyone's been there, the cacophony of noise. It's awful. But there is one thing I learned as a producer of music is when you can't hear something loud enough in the mix, the instinct is turn it up. Actually, the rule is turn everything else down. Right? Yeah. And actually, the way to mix a track is you turn everything down to 0 once you've made the track. You turn everything down to 0, and you start by turning everything up individually. Now, that is, again, a case. It's called subtractive mixing, the idea of taking away. So writing your book, do subtractive writing. Don't worry about all the millions of things you could do. Start taking things away and you will get clarity. It's so important. And this changed my world when I was mixing music. And I just wonder, again, if the same rule applies when you're writing.
That's
too many characters. Yeah. Write too many characters, for example, or too many things going on at once. Oh, there's all different things, or traps that we fall into as well. But Mark, I've got to jump on this. You talked about Bohemian Rhapsody, the Queen pick, right?
Yes.
And you then talked about Pink Floyd.
Yes.
Now, we've all seen how incredibly successful Bohemian Rhapsody has been. I mean, they've Oscars and the band got involved in the movie. I'm just going to stick this out there.
Here we go,
Mr. Stay. Yeah, this could be a big moment in the podcast. I'm just going to pause for effect. Have you ever thought about writing a screenplay biopic for Pink Floyd?
Well, that's what I contacted my agent about. I said,
was it?
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, look, they're doing this Elton John one, the Queen one. I said, if anyone out there is looking for it. The thing is, if you do it on spec, you're kind of wasting your time because there's so many, there's such a, the rights, or, they will, if you want to use the music, you have to have the band on board. And trying to get Pink Floyd to agree on anything, oh my days, it's
okay, so that's the problem, right?
Yeah,
okay.
But I do know a couple.
Could you reach out to one of the band members though, just because I think you have to go into the hornet's nest and say, would just say that because I think honestly, knowing what you know about Pink Floyd and knowing that you're such an incredible fan, and then all the skill sets you've got around writing, you are the perfect person to write that screenplay. Well, I mean, you are.
I am, yes.
I know, right?
Here's an example of how not to do it and how it turned out to be amazing. If you've seen the film Saving Mr. Banks, right, and that's
Tom Hanks, is it?
Yeah, Tom Hanks, and it's all about the making of Mary Poppins, and it's about Disney, and it's about specifically a Disney film. Now, the screenwriter Kelly Marcel, she wrote this on spec. That she woke up one morning and thought, I'm going to write a spec script about Saving Mr. Banks, about the story behind the making of Mary Poppins. And because P.L. Travers notoriously hated Disney, didn't like the cutesy Disney animation, but she needed the money, so she sold them the rights. And it's a wonderful film. It is just a wonderful, wonderful film. And if you love Mary Poppins, doubly so. But she did it on spec. She didn't do it with the cooperation of Disney at all. And of course, the advice you give to any screenwriters, don't do that. Because Disney will just, they'll either say to you, cease and desist because you're infringing on our copyright, or just don't make it, or, right, we'll have that, thank you very much, and we'll go and make it ourselves. But it was such a good script. Disney got wind of it and said, this is amazing, we're going to make this. So it can happen. It can happen. And you get you get Tom Hanks and Emma Thompson in your film.
Exactly. I'd go see a biopic of Pink Floyd. It'd be amazing. Because it is such an incredible story, and there is so much conflict and drama. I think it makes it all. I think you need to drop a note to one of the band members, Mark. Do it. Go on. Do it. See, this is the kind of crazy stuff I do in my coaching. I said, here's an example of what I did once. Somebody said, I said, what would your dream be? I don't want to know what you want to achieve tomorrow or next week or even in a year from now. What would your dream be? And this guy said, to work with Stevie Wonder. I went, right, let's do it. And he went, what? I said, let's do it. I asked him to write 10 letters to Stevie Wonder and send them off through different routes, right, to find different people that knew him potentially, or friends of friends. And I said, send off one of them and number them at the top, letter 1 to 10. Hi Steve, this is number 2. Hope you don't get them all. I'm hoping one of these gets through, right? And they're all slightly different letters. Well, a month later, he rings me up shaking and he said, I just got an email from Stevie Wonder's producer, and this guy was based in New York, and he said he's invited us out to Stevie Wonder's studios in Los Angeles. And I said, so what are you going to do? He said, well, we're going to actually be working with Stevie Wonder's producer. He's going to produce our next single. He's going to do it for us as a favour. And then when they were there, who walks in the room? So, I mean, you know what? And again, I say this to everyone, like, if you want a quote from an author, for example, ask the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or do something. Like, nothing happens until you ask the question. And everyone says, "Oh, how did that person do that?" They asked the question. Literally, they put it out there. And the great thing about questions is people can only say one of two things: yes or no. If they say no, nothing's changed. You're still at where you were. You haven't gone backwards. You just haven't gone forwards. But if there's a chance they might say yes, and that changes your life, then is it worth asking the question? And my answer is absolutely always ask the question. So if things aren't happening for you in your life when you're writing books, ask questions. Ask. That's such an important rule. And we're all really bad at it because we don't like to kind of interrupt people in their lives, for example. So
fortune favours the bold, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic stuff. So that was it was quite a fascinating interview, and I do like the fact that there's a lot of things that Taylor based her book on. She made reference to Bruce Springsteen, and you also kind of mentioned about, and like the front cover for me looks quite Fleetwood Mac-esque.
Oh yeah,
it's got that kind of right.
Yeah,
but again, strong elements of all of those things brought together. But I think there is definitely something to be said to coming up with a slightly different format. We have rules for writing novels, but Taylor kind of broke those. And it was because she broke the rule that was the thing that I think makes her novels stand out.
Yeah, totally, completely. And I was interested in her world building as well, which is not a phrase you hear very often with contemporary fiction. You hear it a lot in fantasy and science fiction and what have you. But yeah, she had to build this world around them. Some of it's familiar to us. She mentions, the Troubadour and, which we mentioned in our book as well. And she mentions other bands and music and what have you. And, but she had to invent an album, songs, lyrics, the tour dates, all of that infrastructure, and make it believable. And it completely was. It sucks you in. It's a brilliant book.
Absolutely fantastic. So, Mark, what's been happening on social media this week?
We've had a lovely week on social media. Now, we were talking about the genre of our book and how it's a bit of I call it a mongrel. It's it's a bit all over the place. Mongrel. Well, we had a lovely tweet from Teresa Rice, who is at Rice for Brains, which is the best Twitter handle.
Love it. Name of the week.
Yeah, she said, "I would call Back to Reality magical realism as far as genre goes," and that's one I've not dabbled with, actually. Now, magical realism isn't an option on BookBub, which is why I'm doing a lot of the ads at the moment. But it's something I'm going to investigate and give it a try. So thanks for that, Teresa. We'll let you know how that turns out. Be interested to see if that actually works. GM White, who is at GM White Writes. Now, you've hinted at this a couple of times on the show, Mr. D. He sent me a link to the movie Yesterday, which stars your mate Ed Sheeran in a small role, about a guy who wakes up in a world where only he remembers the Beatles, so he starts playing Beatles songs and he's a mega star overnight. So of course it's about someone whose life is in a rut. They some weird magical realism event happens. They play music and it changes their life. And he said, "Hey, Bestseller XP, this film looks like it might be a bit of a hit, and I detect some crossover of theme with Back to Reality." Yeah, no kidding. Any plans? Any plans to harness that in your marketing? So yeah, we need to get our thinking caps on.
It's a brilliant question.
Yeah.
If you like Yesterday, you'll love Back to Reality, right?
Yeah.
Because Yesterday comes out in the cinema in June, I believe, in both the UK. They've tied it in with Glastonbury. There's a reason for them doing that. It's written by Richard Curtis, who is the guy behind Four Weddings, a Funeral, and
Blackadder.
All every film that Hugh Grant was ever in, and then it was also directed by none other than Mr. Trainspotting, I believe.
Danny Boyle,
is that right?
Yeah,
Danny Boyle.
Yeah.
So it's quite and Ed Sheeran makes an appearance in it. I don't know how much Ed is actually in it. I don't know whether he's just there to help with the trailers, because obviously, but there's a very funny bit in the trailer actually, if you haven't seen it, about where he's written "Hey Jude." And Ed Sheeran's like, no, hey, dude, it has to be dude. Hey, dude, right? So it's good. But there is a lot of crossover, actually. So it'd be very interesting to see how well that movie does. It's got that British feel to it as well.
It's going to be a smash hit. It's going to be a smash hit. You just look at it. It's got hit written all over it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So but that's a great question. We should have a discussion around that. Like, what do you do when there's a novel, or maybe there's another big book that's come out, which is being successful? I mean, in this case, it's a book rather than it's a film rather than a book. So you can't really say, well, how did they market the book? Because there's not a book. There's probably a book attached to it, but it's all about the film. But maybe there's some crossover things about how they're actually promoting it. I mean, it helps to have Ed Sheeran in the film. I think that's a huge thing. I mean, it's not really something we can replicate. But there's a lot of weird things going on, like, because we talked about Ed, didn't we, at one point? We also talked about Lady Gaga, and then she went on to win an Oscar. I'm not going to say what we talked about, because I want to keep that quiet for now, but we will reveal that eventually in the podcast. But there's a lot of weird stars aligning in our world right now with this book, which makes me think that something's going to happen. Yeah, I can feel it in my waters. But yeah, if you go to see the film, let us know what you think and tell us where you think the similarities are. Here's a good question. Where are the similarities between the film Yesterday and the film book Back to Reality that was written a few years before the film?
We had a lovely tweet from Mark Edwards, best-selling author Mark Edwards, former guest on the show. We love Mark. He's absolutely he's the author of The Retreat and Follow You Home. In fact, by the time this podcast goes out, his new book, Last of the Magpies, will be out. So congratulations with that, Mark. Hope it's a smash hit.
Yeah, well done, Mark.
He said, cleaning out the shed while listening to a fascinating interview with Dave Grockeren on Bestseller Experiment about how Amazon's algorithms work. Highly recommended to my fellow authors. The podcast, not shed cleaning, unless you write in your shed. So thank you very much for that, Mark. This made me, I love that Mark still listens to the show. That's just amazing. That's
absolutely.
But I have a bone to pick with you, Mark Edwards. Now, if you go on Amazon UK and you type in the name Mark Stay, not that I do that on a daily basis.
No, of course you don't.
But if you type in Mark Stay, I'm the first thing that comes up. Right? It used to be a brand of brass rubber or something, but now it's me. So I'm the first.
Looking up.
First thing is End of Magic, Back to Reality, but in third place, it's not Robot Overlords. Oh no, it's Mark's Edwards book that's coming in September called Here to Stay. So that combination of Mark Edwards, Here to Stay, Mark Stay. So come
That's
September.
Genius, Mark.
No, it's not. It's not.
No, it is. It's clever. It's brilliant. It's Mr. Edwards has obviously looked at your rising star and he's thought, I need to jump on the back of this. Mr. Stays. What if I called my book? What if I put the word stay in it? Yeah. Maybe I'll mess up the algorithms and get in. I think it's genius, Mr. Edwards. I think I bow to your incredibleness.
Never mind that. That means whenever I type my name in on Amazon, his book is going to come top. That's not fair, Mr. Edwards. Change the title.
Yeah, but hang on a minute. Does it not work both ways?
Call it that.
No, but doesn't it not work both ways? When people type in Mark Edwards, they might get a book written by Mark Stay in the list. Have you checked that?
Well, I don't know. I'll check that in a minute. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Do you know what, though? I'll tell you what. This takes on a whole new level. Because we did this within music. We actually renamed one of our remixes. I'll say this, I can admit this now because it's many years on. We renamed one of our remixes and we put the word 0 and then something blah, 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 and then 7 in the name of the remix because we were always being compared to the band 07. And we thought if we put the words 0 and 7 in the remix name, if someone searches for 07, they might find us. And because we knew we were like them, they might like our music. So there are lots of things. I mean, we talk about like throwaway titles and stuff, but there are ways that you can use a title as Mr. Edwards has demonstrated to infiltrate other popular authors such as Mr. Stay. It's great.
They've been cheap.
Of course, Mark will deny all this on Twitter now. Hopefully, Mr. Edwards will come out and say that no, I didn't do that at all. Which would be great.
Sorry, I've just noticed. Just clicking on the End of Magic on Amazon, I've got a new review. 5 stars. Let's come out today. Pace and punch grabs the reader. This book. Sorry, I'm just pimping myself here. This book grabbed me in the first couple of pages, and when 2 or 3 of the brief chapters, I was in this world with its magic, yet eerie familiar feel. Geography, look at the maps and multiple metaphors and allegories for our own world of disasters. Still, the cracking pace, story and characters keeps you whizzing through, only thinking of the human parallels at the end. I read it in 2 sittings on successive days. Couldn't stop. Really want more. Hope there will be another at least. Smiley face. Woohoo! That's from Sheila M. Thank you, Sheila M. You've just made my day. Hey!
Dear listener, you can't see Mark's face right now, but as we talked about earlier, signing a book is one thing. That's living the dream. But reading a review like that of a book that you've spent many, many months, sometimes years writing, doesn't that make it all worthwhile?
Oh, mate, I've had a bit of a drought. I haven't had a new review for about a month either, so that's really made my day. That's just fantastic.
Brilliant.
That's just
so
fantastic.
Firstly, if you leave reviews, that's how happy you make an author.
Oh, yeah,
But
man.
secondly, if you haven't published your book yet, here's the incentive to get it done. Get it done so that you can read people write reviews like that, because it is the best feeling in the world. Well done, Mark. It's a lovely feeling, isn't it? It makes, and they keep coming, it's just one of those things that just keeps topping you up as a writer. I think when people haven't released anything, they don't get that wonderful feedback, and it's hard to sometimes keep on going. So get that book out, start getting your reviews, and realize that there are people out there that are going to love what you do.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff.
And just to end on a sad note, and I need to thank Zach Erlock, one of our listeners, for drawing this to my attention. He tagged us on Twitter with this. But sad to report that one of our guests, the great Warren Adler, author of The War of the Roses and many, many more, sadly passed away in the last week or so. And it was such a privilege to interview him recently. And he was such a gent, a truly inspirational writer. And what got me, he was 91 when he passed. He was still fizzing with ideas and innovation. He was working on an audiobook autobiography of his life. He still had ideas for stories. He had so much energy. I only hope that when I'm 91, I have half the energy that he had, the passion for writing that he had. So, Warren Adler, rest in peace, sir. It was a real pleasure to speak to you.
Brilliant stuff. It's incredible to have that. And if you missed that, do go and check the show notes. You'll be able to listen back to that interview, which, has a lot more meaning now, because it was so recently that you talked to him.
Yeah.
So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you indeed for all of your support, your ongoing support. Do pop along to our Facebook page. If you are signing up to Patreon, do send us those photos. I'm serious. I want to see them. Tell us about your books. When you sign up to Patreon, we like to obviously give your book a plug as well, or whichever book you're thinking of writing. To do that, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support, and you can sign up there. You'll get access as well to well over, approaching, I think, 50 hours of deep dive material as well, which is kind of like university level, conference level, incredible expert advice where we deep dive on very specific topics. And those are worth their weight in gold. That's not me saying that. That's the people that have supported this podcast saying that. That's what we constantly hear on the BXP team. So, Mark, is there anything else we should talk about, the other places people can come find us?
Yeah, come and see us on Facebook. We're on Bestseller Experiment at Facebook. We're on Twitter and Instagram at BestsellerXP. We're on Pinterest too. If you've got artwork you want to show off, we've got a board there for all our listeners, so come and drop us a line there too. Subscribe, rate and review on your podcatcher of choice. It really makes a difference. It makes us a lot more visible and helps people make their mind up if they want to listen to the show. And big thanks, as always, to Dave, our editor, who performs miracles on a weekly basis. Thanks, Dave.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. So it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye!
Goodbye!
To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/back to reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.